Oh, hello and welcome to Ready Set, The Future is Hybrid. My name is Phoebe Go, and I am hosting a very exciting panel today with some recognized thought leaders and technology advocates from around the world. But let's introduce the topic first. We are going to be talking about hybrid cloud. This term has been around for a while, but I've seen the meaning and the purpose of hybrid cloud evolving over time. Initially, it was more about transforming IT by connecting on-premises data centers and servers and storage to public cloud resources, maybe to burst or to leverage elasticity of the cloud as an emergency measure. The dream to integrate these resources was difficult at the time because you needed middleware, complex integrations, networking, and to build a control plane to manage, monitor, and optimize all of those resources. Today, though, hybrid cloud has come a long way, and the architecture is focused less on these physical elements and more about the portability of applications and workloads. And even user experiences across all the different clouds that are available, and automating a lot of those resources and the deployment of them, so that we can focus more on bringing good business value to our customers. So speaking of portability, hybrid also means the ability to mobilize applications to the right place at the right time. Maybe there's reasons like lowering cost or to speed up innovation, or maybe, as we've seen in the recent shift to virtual and working from home, to move workloads to more accessible locations. Anyway, in this community roundtable, we will uncover what is fueling and hindering hybrid cloud adoption based on the NetApp report, The Future is Hybrid, and the survey results and feedback from our own customers on their hybrid cloud journeys with their adoption, their use cases, workloads, and business benefits. So let's get right into the introductions of our panel. Folks, as I introduce you, since we are talking about hybrid, have a think about what kind of hybrid would you be if you could combine any two technologies? So let's start with our special guest, Nigel Poulton. Nigel's a techaholic with a passion for demystifying exciting technologies. He's written several best-selling books and video training courses and helped well over 1 million people take their first steps with Docker and Kubernetes. Prior to working with containers, Nigel did everything from changing backup tapes, resetting passwords, designing and managing hybrid clouds, and more. So welcome, Nigel.
Hey, cheers, Phoebe. Always a pleasure. And honestly, what an epic topic that we've got to talk about tonight. I'm looking forward to it.
Oh, thank you. And our featured panelist today is Darnell Fatigati, a senior product marketer at NetApp focusing on hybrid cloud. Darnell brings a wealth of experience in product marketing and focusing deeply on solving enterprise user needs, challenges, and opportunities. Hey, Darnell.
Hey, Phoebe. How are you?
Any thought on your hybrid technical specialty?
Oh, wow. I think I would have to be a mixture of YouTube music and like some sort of, flying device, like maybe a jetpack or something. I don't know. It sounds like fun.
I love that. That sounds like fun. Up next is Matthew Underhill. He is the head of infrastructure at Alfred H. Knight out of Liverpool. Matthew's broad experiences in the industry focus on supporting businesses to achieve outcomes by delivering robust and reliable infrastructure. Matthew is also an enthusiastic member of the NetApp A team. Hey, Matthew.
Hey, Phoebe. Thanks for having me.
Any thoughts on your technical hybrid?
Well, when you said technology, I was thinking there's a lot of things that could be technology. So I think I'd like to be a fridge mixed with a laser, because everyone loves lasers, and then I'd be cool.
You'd be a cool laser. Next, I'd like to introduce Karen Lopez. Karen is a senior project manager and architect at Info Advisors. She has over 20 years now, right, of experience in project and data management on large programs. Karen specializes in the practical application of data management principles, and she is a Microsoft MVP, specializing in data modeling and database design. And welcome, Karen. Any of those your technical hybrid?
Yeah, sort of. So I was thinking about this, and I think my combination would be vintage sports cars and something like Peloton, where I am combining old things like my body and all the data I can measure about them.
Oh, I like that. That's excellent. And you could maybe have in the sports cars your Peloton, like, you can do it. You can do it.
Exactly.
And last but not least, Michael Hay is the Vice President, Product Management of Private Cloud and Business Continuity at Teradata. As a strategic and recognized technology and business leader, Michael's efforts have been instrumental in driving innovations to produce significant and sustained business outcomes. Hey, Michael, welcome to the panel. How about you? You've had a little bit of time to think about your
have, and so I've got two, right? Because I've had a little extra time. First is sort of a little hobby I've been developing, which is somehow combining like old vintage computer chips and art. So I'm kind of doing some pour overs, and I've got some barren walls I'm trying to decorate. So that's kind of interesting, kind of tactile and hands-on. Another is something I've thought of for a long time, which is how to combine like agribusiness and IT in some sort of weird quasi-economics way. So a little bit of a brainy thing and a little bit of a tactile thing. That's how I'd hybridize. So really great to be here, by the way. Super happy to entertain the discussion.
Yeah, it's going to be a really fun one. All right, so let's bring everybody back up onto the screen and let's just talk initially about what is hybrid cloud. So before we get into the study results and some of these topics, let's kind of think of a definition. So Darnell, hybrid's a lot of things for a lot of people, as we found out, but how do you define hybrid cloud today?
I think actually your description, you nailed it. And, I look at what NIST defines hybrid cloud to be. So the National Institute of Standards and Technology. And basically they define it as two or more distinct cloud infrastructure. So it could be a private, public, that remain unique, but they're bound together by standardized or proprietary technology that enables, as you said, data and application portability. So I think, as you mentioned, a lot of different people have different definitions. You ask 10 people, you'll get 10 different answers. But I think the real key thing here is that they're bound together, and it's enabling accessibility of that data.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting. You say they're bound together. Do you think that's changed from how maybe we thought about hybrid cloud when we were first kind of investigating this architecture?
Yeah, I mean, I think that people still define hybrid cloud as two disparate or two or more disparate groups of infrastructure. I don't even think that, there is a standard definition that people have like fully embraced and adopted yet. Because I think, and based on some of the questions in our survey, I think initially we wanted to make sure that people understood what we were talking about and how we're defining it. But I think initially they defined a hybrid cloud as being separate and not necessarily integrated. So that's an important distinction.
Hey,
Yeah,
Phoebe.
Yeah.
So I know that Darnell said like it can mean anything to anybody and maybe everything to everybody. She talked about portability of workloads. She talked about standardized components as well. If I include you, Phoebe, there's 6 of us on the panel. I'm just going to throw this out there, right? Among the 6 of us, right, we can all come to a consensus that any kind of hybrid cloud to bring that portability and to sort of knit the disparate infrastructures together, it's got to be Kubernetes, right? I know it's not an NIS standard or whatever, but it's de facto. Come on.
Kubernetes
Surely.
without data? Because, you're kind of heading down that path.
Yeah, exactly. Like, for instance, is it really hybrid cloud the way we intend it if all I'm doing is sending my third copy of backups to the cloud? Not my first copy of backups, not my secondary, but my third. Is that hybrid cloud? I'm not sharing workloads.
So I would say, Karen, I totally get where you're coming from there. And I do think that unfortunately that's hybrid cloud today, but it probably won't be going forward. Data's obviously been one of the more difficult challenges for any kind of workload and virtualization and hybrid of anything, right? So I do feel it's really early days there. I kind of wish that wasn't a definition, but for me, I think you're dead right. I think it's not great, but that is part of the definition of hybrid cloud today.
Yeah, and I do think you're onto something there, Nigel, because how to get started, right? There's operational stuff that goes along with the portability, whether it's computer data portability. And the way you exercise that is just starting from somewhere. And if it has to be sort of that third copy, and eventually you go from just a static dark copy of data to something that's active, we certainly hear some of our customers talk about that. Let's get the data there, and then let's activate it. And it's kind of a 2-step process. And I think, Darnell and Phoebe, just to react to the whole, I've got balkanized clouds, right? So Balkans was the notion of hybrid. That has to be shifted towards active, right? It needs to be whether it's a simple backup, whether it's active data, whether it's something more, a new workload. All of those become germane to kind of shift the definition for sure.
Yeah, we're definitely seeing some really cool conversations where we used to have, primary data center and maybe a secondary or backup or a DR data center. And
Mhm.
now that we're starting to use cloud in that conversation, we're getting customers saying, I want to actually use my backup data. I want to activate it. I want to
That's
start
right.
doing development or testing on it, or I want to do some, analytics on it. So then that kind of becomes a primary in a sense. And maybe it needs its own backup somewhere else. Maybe it goes back on premises. But yeah, that's a really interesting conversation. I really like that one with customers.
Well,
I'm
and
going to
what
just put it out there and say, for me, maybe it's because I'm a little bit younger than everyone, getting started a little bit later. I think it's an idea, or it should be an idea. It's not one technology or the other. It's a combination of technologies. And once you have that idea, move it around, see where it is. So, Kubernetes could be one of the methods that you use to create your hybrid cloud. But I think generally, if you start off with an idea of hybrid cloud, I want to have things in more than one location, um, that will help you to really achieve hybrid cloud rather than starting off. Well, maybe you get something from the sea level. We must have a hybrid cloud, so we squirt off our backup, and then that's what we're calling our hybrid cloud kind of thing.
Yeah, I still think some of that's there, Matthew. I mean, it's by fiat, by order of the executive, we must have the cloud, right? That's
Yes, yeah.
that's a key part of the definition. But yeah, I think there's, what's the purpose? I know the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office has a free data pool, and if you wanted to do some competitive analysis and mix that up with data that you might have in your four walls, that seems like a righteous use case. You get back to purpose and value, and if your definition of hybrid doesn't include purpose and value, I don't know what the point is.
Yeah, that's very true.
Well, Danielle, in that survey, what were some of those common workloads and use cases that customers were, respondents were kind of talking about using a
Yeah.
hybrid cloud for?
Well, and it's interesting to hear you guys talk about this because it sort of reflects what we found in our survey is that data protection, right? So that it's readily understood. It's the most widely cited use case for hybrid cloud today because we're talking about backing up, secondary copies, creating DR locations, even archiving, and tiering probably second to that. But I think that customers can see the value of that immediately, right? Like it's much more tangible. The tools are readily available. It's easier for them. And one of the biggest challenges that they have in executing their hybrid cloud strategies is around skill set, right? And the choice of tools out there and the disparate tools out there. So starting off with something like data protection makes it a little bit more. It brings it down a level. It's easier. It's easier for them to get into, and it's easier for them to see real benefits right away. So that's one for sure.
And that makes me think, right? Karen's worked a lot with data. We've talked
Yeah.
about data a lot. And so, I mean, like you said, backup is kind of that we all get it. We know what it's there for. We know what you use it for. But Karen, in your kind of experience, when you're talking about hybrid cloud and data, we're having a really fun session with lots of cool background noise.
Yeah.
That just makes it fun. We're real. We're live. Yeah. What are your thoughts,
Sorry.
Karen?
Well, I think the main thing is that what forms people's decisions today on hybrid cloud are the costing models. And because it's cloud, the technology's agile, we're more agile, but how things are billed for, how they're charged, how much compute costs, all of those things are impacting our technology and architecture decisions more than ever before because we're really going from a very capital expense driven architectural process to an operational one. And I think if we had this webinar 2 years ago or 2 years from now, we'd come to the same sort of conclusion that the right answer is going to change over time. Also, if the cloud providers were ever to start charging for ingress, that would also change these types of decisions. So it's kind of funny how follow the money also works with follow the architecture.
Yeah, for sure.
Actually, Karen, I want to just touch on something that you said, because we saw by far in our survey that the number one driver for hybrid cloud adoption is flexibility. So, I mean, that's it, right? I mean, your cost requirements change. You know, your risk requirements change. Your reliability and performance requirements change. And I think that's why customers are saying right now that they want to create these platforms, because they want that flexibility.
Well, as people who have built platforms, Michael or Matthew, what are your thoughts on that concept of flexibility?
Yeah, I think the first thing is don't fall prey to fashion. We in the tech industry, we don't have runways, we don't have like Fashion Week, but we do have resumes. And there's a tendency to kind of chase around a buzzword, and then the trough of disillusionment, all the stuff that some of the analysts teams talk about, is what the journey you actually have to go on. And I think, to Karen's point, 24 months from now, when the doldrums of maturation have sort of sunk in, that's when people will be talking about not hybrid cloud. They'll be talking about the value that they have drawn from flexibility, the value that they have drawn from the use cases, right? They were able to, say, mix up, since I talked about it, agriculture data and patent data, and figure out something that insulated them, say, from the inclement economic circumstances of the day, right? So that's what they'll be talking about. They're not going to be talking about, did I get my third backup or my archive in the cloud? They'll be talking about the value that has been derived. And that's where we need to get to. And so I think the thing is to understand the fashion, but don't fall prey to the fashion. That's really important.
Phoebe, I know you're going to come to Matthew in just a second. I just want to pick up on that, though, Michael.
I was going to think.
Yeah.
No, you're going to talk about Kubernetes, aren't you?
No.
Yes, you are.
I do feel like you kind of saved yourself a little bit at the end there, Michael, because I was concerned with the idea of not following fashion. I fully appreciate where you're coming from, but when the writing is all over the wall for something, and we're constantly making bets in technology, almost every day. Which cloud do we go with? Which platforms? Which orchestration systems do we go with? With an eye to the future, that we want to invest time and money and skills and talent in things that will be of lasting value for the organization and lasting value for customers. I use an analogy a lot, and it's a little bit cheesy, but if you were an organization that decided virtualization, like in the guise of VMware or whatever, wasn't for you as an individual or as an organization, made that decision 10, 15 years ago or whatever, you would likely be out of business or out of a job as an individual now, because these waves have to be ridden. And when something as big as VMware, or as big as, and I won't say it, right, but as big as some of the waves that are coming along at the moment are, if you don't ride them as an individual or as an organization, I feel like there's a hefty price that you will pay further on down the line. So I don't know if it really is a thing, but we used to say when I was growing up, fashion fades, but style remains. Yeah. And I don't know if, yes, we shouldn't watch the fads that come and go, but if we see something that we feel is a bit of a juggernaut, or is, something that is almost a tidal force, that we've got to roll with it. Otherwise, there are serious risks for the organization and business, and for us as individuals, if we want to get a job in the future.
I want to come back to the technology part, but I want to actually ask Matthew, as somebody who's building platforms, right? I thought that the comments that you guys were making was around, well, don't follow a fad, but part of the thing that's important with following a fad is, what skills do I pick up, or what skills do I train my team on? So Matthew, when you're kind of looking at this and kind of these building these new architectures, hybrid cloud architectures, what kinds of skills are you looking at enabling your people so that we're able to ride these waves but not fall prey to Ugg boots and bad hair?
Well, actually, I mean, I was going to just respond to Nigel, but in terms of the skills and things, I think, as tech people, and as I'm looking for recruits and people to join my team, you have to be looking for people who are interested in the latest technology. We're all going out there getting our various certifications, or just being generally interested in things as they grow and as they progress. But I would say, in terms of what we're actually doing as we're building, we are, Alfred H. Knight, we're 140 years old. We've been family owned and family run. and that's kind of kept us very stable, very grounded. And we're not looking at technology in our production that's not, it has to be well proven in the field. Otherwise, we're unsure. Is it going to break? Is someone going to release a patch, and then there we go. And so we are looking at the new technology, but we're also building our things on technology that has been proven in the past, because
Hey,
otherwise otherwise well, it's my head on the chopping block, I guess.
Well, I mean, I think that's a really important point. And, perhaps if you're a leading edge cloud company, being on that bleeding edge is important. But, if the intensiveness of your business has to do with not information technology, you don't need to be on the latest bit. You need to be on the stablest bit, because your business depends upon getting to value and insights. I mean, I have a hobby of kind of working on some data projects on the side, and frankly, 2-year-old Docker technology is just fine because I'm interested in the business problem. So
I support that 100%. So most of my experience is at enterprise organizations. And the most amazing part about it is when I'm hiring, of course, I want someone with the skill set that we need, but I want someone that can actually do cost benefit risk analysis about change. And I work with, I'm kind of this way too, as a gadget person, that I'm excited about new technologies, but that doesn't mean it's going to be a good fit for the problems I'm trying to solve in enabling a business to sell the widgets that they're selling or developing the widgets that they're developing.
So it might not be today, Karen, but I feel with anything that's like a sea change, like virtualization and cloud and things like that, that increasingly it will be the resolution to your problem tomorrow. Like, I know I don't want to sound like I'm banging the drum about Kubernetes, because I've spent probably the last 4 or 5 years saying it is not for everybody. It really isn't. But I do find increasingly now I'm like, oh, it's becoming more and more right for more and more people. And there's a trend going there. Now, I'm not saying be on the bleeding edge. Like, I appreciate what you say, Karen and Michael, as well, that like you want to be unstable. You've got to deliver value and stability today, but you must have at least, as an individual or as an organization, people or half an eye on what the future is, what's coming down the line. Because we said at the beginning, didn't we, that, today, what hybrid cloud looks like today will not be what it looks like tomorrow. And we don't want to be bitten by that.
So yeah, let's talk about that a little bit. That this is a hybrid cloud discussion, and so adopting these things kind of incrementally seems like it's got more benefits than saying wholesale, hey, we're going to a Kubernetes microservices driven architecture because that's the hybrid cloud, right? So anybody have kind of thoughts on how you might adopt pieces of this? Where does it make sense to adopt a hybrid cloud architecture, maybe with Kubernetes or maybe without Kubernetes?
Go ahead, Matthew.
I was going to say, in terms of that sort of thing, I always think back to what Matt Watts sort of wrote about, and it was, cloud first ? I guess. And that's how I approach things, right? Like, so it could be cloud first ? Or, Kubernetes ? Or, all of the above. And I mean, I'm definitely seeing use cases coming down the line where, Kubernetes or containerization is going to be something that we're going to have to do. But, I think it's always about making sure that it is right for the technology so that you can realize, the value of it, rather than just saying, oh, you know what, I'm going to stick whatever it is, SQL or something into that container. Oh, that's broken, kind of thing.
I think it's you make a good point. Like, I think it's like, I want to just tweak one of your words, and it's like picking the right technology for the right workload as opposed to the underlying infrastructure, and we all deciding that this is the right kind of way to build something. It's, well, actually, what are we trying to do with it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Karen or Michael, do you have any experiences that you could share with us around doing that?
I certainly have. So we have customers with very large systems. Like I've been over the past 2 weeks talking with a couple customers about 3 petabyte disaster recovery problems. Right? These are enviable, large scale, avant-garde data protection issues, and they're thinking of hybrid cloud. But they're not just thinking about it for data protection. They're asking themselves, to Matthew's point, like, okay, I have a new use case. It's running in the cloud. What can I do? Can I reduce if I'm a bank, reduce my cost to comply? Are there new workloads I can sort of work on to discover if I'm in oil and gas? And so some of that speaks to the virtues of the mix of public and private cloud technologies, right? Because you can spin things up, but then you need that interlock function. And the company I work for, Teradata, has really fabulous technology to kind of build a data fabric between things that are on premises and things that are sort of in a public cloud, thus manifesting a hybrid cloud. And you can explore new workloads, you can explore new data sets, and look to solve new business problems. So I see certainly that intermix becoming increasingly relevant. And it's the extension from, hey, let me create that secondary copy, let me activate that secondary copy, and then let me find these new use cases that maybe can activate different lines of business workloads and new customers inside of, if I'm a user, like my customers internally, right?
Yeah. And actually, Michael, that's pretty consistent too with what we've seen. I mean, in our survey and just, from like some of our case studies and win reports, is that customers, as I mentioned earlier, data protection was pretty much the number one use case, but we're seeing things like it bursting much more for additional processing,
Right.
like big banks that, need to run reports but they only need to do it, once per month. So,
Right.
they're caching data in the cloud and, using those additional cloud resources. We're also seeing more, some side-by-side production. So like, they're essentially migrating workloads. So they're taking it, from on-prem and then they're putting it into the cloud for, whatever reason, to put it closer to the users, to put it closer to applications that they may be, taking advantage of cloud provider services. So I think what we're definitely seeing is the expansion outside of just, the data protection workload for hybrid cloud. But, to Nigel would probably be happy to hear this. We actually, surprisingly, when we asked about workloads in our survey, we did see that about 30% of our customers said they're using hybrid clouds with containerized applications, which, we didn't ask them specifically, are those Kubernetes environments? But I mean, I think we could pretty much guess that they are.
I think, on that though, Darnell, is that I know while we've been talking about how do we and how do organizations choose the right technologies for the right jobs and things at the right time and what have you, I do feel like just about every organization though really wants to be able to standardize on something so that it's not a case of, we're running 5 different stacks for 5 different use cases and what have you. Ideally, an organization wants to say, look, we deploy this as our standard infrastructure. Of course, there will be edge cases, but generally speaking, you don't want edge cases. Look, years ago when I was hiring for a Linux role, I remember interviewing certain people from a particular organization in London, a large financial organization, that kind of baked their own Linux kernel and all this stuff around it. And it was like, do you know what? Who wants to actually be in that business when, these days, at the time, Linux was really stable and everybody else was just using vanilla Linux? Like, why am I going through the hard work of baking stuff myself? Organizations want, you don't want to invest time and people and money in learning all these different technologies. Let's just standardize. Especially the lower level components, the software and hardware infrastructure bits. And I know at first, you're sacrificing performance or you're sacrificing some features in the early days. But as these technologies, cloud and virtualization and containers and things, as they mature and evolve, I mean, hyper-converged infrastructures, it was always originally a trade-off of you don't quite get the performance or this and that, but now you kind of do. So, everybody should ultimately, I could be getting shot down here, right? But should be aiming for a simplified, standardized stack and not a bunch of different silos. We know that, right?
Yeah, and I think that's the bridge, Nigel, for what Matthew was talking about, right? That give you that sense of normalization, because investing in variance for variance sake doesn't actually help at all, right? It just means you're kind of churning and not progressing, right? So that gap of value is hindered by variation, and I think that's a great call out, actually, right? That standardization is critical. Yeah.
Yep.
And it's a big call out to people managing their careers, because I've seen it even in the database world, that the people who specialized in doing the very, very lowest layer of tuning queries and applications and workloads, who specialized in file level block sizes and that stuff, there's less and less demand for those skills. And so, like, there's one friend of mine who I know is very good at that. And I'm like, great, in 5 years, you'll be like the COBOL programmers making $250,000 a year. But it's not a good career plan to hope that you end up being so obsolete in your skills that now you're in high demand because everyone else has retired.
Well, just you have to go work for the cloud providers, because those are the people that seem to be bottling a lot of that talent up, right?
Yeah.
Well, this is an interesting discussion about maturity, right? Because I think containers, Kubernetes, even hybrid cloud itself as a concept has kind of gone through that iterative, we're going to change everything, the definitions change weekly, to the point where it's kind of becoming something we can have a conversation about and it's still relevant in a month or 2 or 3, right? And I think that's where we want to be with any of our architecture, our technology decisions. But Danielle, I want to ask, in your research, how has maturity of hybrid cloud been perceived by our customers or your respondents, really, survey respondents?
This actually was something that took us by surprise, is that the majority of respondents said either they were traditional in the sense that they haven't yet created what we were talking about as our definition of hybrid cloud, integrated hybrid cloud, right? So they had sort of silos, pools of resources. And then the next group, which was pretty much the other half, said we're maturing. So we're just starting to do it, which is consistent with everything that we've said, right? Like, they're going to start with some, easier use cases and then get the benefits of that, sort of understand the tools that you're going to use, understand the processes that you're going to use, understand where you could standardize things, and then expand that out to other use cases over time.
Well, I want to dive into that a little bit, and this is to anybody really, is what are those steps? Like, how do you get from group A to group B? I want to be in group B because it sounds like the more progressive place to be career-wise, but also, in terms of being able to move faster. So what are your thoughts on how do you do that? And it's not just, start using Kubernetes, right, Nigel?
Yeah.
No,
First you have to make 100 mistakes and then you're good.
That's right. That's right.
Well, what are those mistakes? What do you think they'll go through if they do it? Maybe how do you fail at hybrid cloud? Is it possible?
Absolutely.
Most lift and shift with no re-architecting and no sort of dealing with security differences and how things are tuned. Like, there are some really small workload applications that I think with low demand and low availability needs that people use as proofs of concept and those things. And that's all good, but it's not going to teach you the lessons that you need to learn from a massively large workload with big data streams and all this other stuff. So I'm really joking saying making the mistakes. It's just, if you don't the quote that goes around that cloud isn't another location, it's a new way of doing computing. And people who don't realize that often are going to make more mistakes.
Yeah, I want to jump off of that. I think what Karen just talked about is essential. If you don't start, in effect, with a clean sheet of paper, then you're not going to pick up the clean parts to start from that are new. So if you're approaching it from the brownfield, you will very much worry about lift and shift, operationalization of things you've already got, all of the stuff that you've maybe done a good job as an organization forever. But if you are starting with new workloads, if you are starting where there's new application potential, the freedom of experimenting with the application, right? So it's a high risk, high return environment, also carries with it the freedom of experimenting with the infrastructure and the linkage between private and public to make a hybrid type scenario. But again, the brownfield, that's where it gets trickier. We certainly, I would say our customers are aggressively moving in the cloud, and they're just being smart about how they're approaching it with a mix of brown and greenfield type applications.
So yeah, I would say, sorry, I was just Karen took all the words right out of my mouth, but so I definitely agree with that. I guess what I do is we architect for the cloud. I don't lift and shift. I've tried it, doesn't work. Had those 100 mistakes, and then you bring it back, and then everything's great. So yeah, architect for the cloud, plan your workloads to use cloud technologies. Don't say, well, just I'll stick a DC up there, it'll be great, and we'll be printing in no time.
So something that's really good, actually. But something that I think a lot of organizations have done, like a tried and tested pattern, is to take a group of superstars within your organization, like a SWAT team, for want of a better expression. People that are keen to live on the edge and pick up and learn something new and make the mistakes that Karen talked about. But they tend to start with a net new application, like we talked about, brownfield. I mean, don't go there for your first few applications, for sure. But anything, sometimes something net new that's maybe internal first, architect that around the cloud with containers and maybe Kubernetes and things like that. And have that team learn on the job and document it. Then go something net new that is production, because that's very, very different. Production, customer facing, and have this team sort of skill up, start to document how they do things, and then start inserting them within other teams around the organization as you sort of kind of spread the knowledge within the organization. And it's a journey that probably is never ending. Like, I mean, a lot of these organizations that I've spoken to, right, some of them, so they'll have like containers shoulder to shoulder with virtual machines, shoulder to shoulder with physical servers, shoulder to shoulder with, iSeries and mainframe. These things never go away, and we're constantly sort of iterating on this. But the idea is, you get some clever people that are really up for the challenge. You start with net new stuff, give them a few projects, they learn, they make a bunch of mistakes, yeah, Karen, and then they start disseminating that, further and wider within the organization. And I've seen tons of people, they're not super far down that journey, but they did that with Docker in the early days. They're doing it with Kubernetes. They did it with cloud. When cloud was like, what do we even mean when we talk about cloud?
I like that because, it really lends itself to that concept of picking a standard model. Like if you get too many really smart people doing their own thing and working out how to do hybrid cloud, you'll end up with 5, 6, 10 hybrid cloud models, which don't necessarily align. And then you have to kind of bring them all together at some point, hopefully, or work out how you're going to integrate those, to Daniel's point. So I want to kind of shift onto a topic, though, that is just more of a, I guess, where do you see the biggest advantages of adopting a hybrid cloud? I just want to get, like, I guess, your perspective. We've talked about some of those challenges, all the mistakes you're going to make. Oh my gosh. So why should we do this? So maybe Karen, let's start with you. The 100 mistakes leads to...
Well, so again, I come back to the costing of it all, right? So having hybrid solutions allows you to optimize for all the things. So for the physics of data, I mean, some people, one of the things that gets people in the cloud is they realize they can't tune their way around physics. So the cloud offers, you can take data closer to people and workloads closer to people if you have global offices and help them with performance, but you're still not going to beat the speed of light when you do that. The other is that trying to optimize one type of cloud architecture that is standardized across your company. Of course, we still need to tailor and customize for the workloads, for the risk, for the data sovereignty, like where can the data be, and data gravity. Does it make sense to move this data around, or does it make more sense to bring the compute to the data? All of those types of things are much easier to do in the cloud, but there are still going to be cost, benefit, and risk analyses that say, no, staying on-prem with our traditional architectures makes sense right now today. It might not make sense in 6 months or a year from now, but today, this is our optimized solution.
Michael, I know we had a discussion a while ago about how some of these cloud architectures weren't the right decision. What's your how do you see the benefit of hybrid cloud, now having been through that?
Again, it's about there's different paces of friction in your IT infrastructure, and the pace of friction is lower, right? So the amount of things, and just what Karen talked about, like, data gravity, the fact that there's more consistent ubiquitous pipes, there's CDN services, there's a lot more that you don't have to build and you can take advantage of. And so the friction to do all of those things is like gone, and therefore it lets you get to that clean sheet of paper faster. And so where you can find the alignment of your needs, so hence value extension with lower friction. And by the way, high friction's fine sometimes, like compliance workloads and privacy and other things with high friction, that's good. But innovating and trying to figure out, oh my God, where are my customers in this journey of this new device that I've just built and put out there? I just saw that was it Comcast has put out a new a set-top box, like a little thing. Well, they probably need some data about that. They're probably going to be using the cloud. They probably shouldn't build their own data centers, right? Which is the antonym of sort of Matthew's point, right? They probably should put the data center in the cloud in this case. So I think, again, it's about the pace of friction.
That's awesome. I like that comment. All right. Well, I think we actually have to wrap. So I love this conversation, and I want to keep it going on Twitter. So make sure we'll start a thread on Twitter, and anybody can join in. And if you'd like to find out more of this great content and conversation around cloud, hybrid cloud, private and public clouds, and also how to build cost-effective, cost-optimized data centers, check out the rest of the NetApp TV content. We'll be having more of these roundtables, we'll be having breakout sessions, and we will also be hosting some really cool tech talks. And demos as well, which I like personally. So thank you all for joining us. Thank you to the panel. Let's bring everybody back so I can say thank you to everybody. I really appreciated your time today, and this was just such a fun discussion. I am Phoebe Go. This is Ready, Set, and I will see you next time.